Hi everyone, really good to see you, and nice to see some faces that I obviously recognized from a while back, but also to meet those of you who I actually haven't met formally before. And it's good to see that pretty much straight up that the jokes straight out of Pete's mouth are exactly the same as they were when we did the APC all those months ago. So clearly a close-knit group, and I think that's always wonderful. One of the things that actually the reason I agreed to do this talk on this day is because I heard what David was speaking about after me. So I thought, well, that's brilliant. I'll come along. And so I'm here to listen to David as well. So hopefully I can add a little bit extra to your time here. But positive psychology is the thing that I'm passionate about. I actually got into positive psychology through the sports psychology field. And that's what I did my master's and my research in. And having played international sport, I was always fascinated about how powerful the mind is, and how I still remember early days working with a sports psychologist whose phrase to me was, get out of the way of yourself. And it was very much that kind of sparked my interest into this field. And since then moved into the positive psychology space in a big way. And most of my work now is actually done in the education field, working with school leaders, policymakers, to try and look at ways of introducing positive psychology coaching into the educational field at a leadership level, so that we can cascade it down and teach the skills of flourishing to the young people sort of in teachers' care. So I'm going to just share the screen, and hopefully you are able to all see it. Is on. So if you just let me know when that pops up. Is that all there, Pete?
Yeah.
Are we able to?
That's
all right, great. So yeah, the idea is just to have a brief look at positive psychology and how that impacts the way that I coach. I really enjoyed going back. I did a coaching qualification 20 odd years ago, but going and doing the course again with Pete was really, really impactful for me, because what it did was get me back into asking more questions, and that Michael Bungay Stainer's try and sort of contain the advice monster. And but of course, at the same time, trying to look at ways that I could still bring the psychology piece to bear, but in a way where it was more coaching. So the positive coaching psychology is obviously really powerful for me. So let's have a brief look at it today, just talking about the background of positive psychology as a science to start off with, so that those of you who don't know about the field can just get an understanding in it. Then I think what's critical is for us to define what we see flourishing and wellness as, because for me, the work that I do is around this piece. How can we get people to flourish and be well? And then look at how the field of positive psychology coaching has grown over the last sort of dozen or so years. And then I want to just introduce two frameworks that I use, which give pathways to coaching. So the work that I do in the actual session, what does that look like? And a couple of examples, and then some Q&A at the end, hopefully. I'd said to Pete at the start, I think probably the most powerful part of it is the question and answer bit at the end. So please do start thinking of questions you want to ask. So I think the first thing is just to look back at the history of positive psychology. So it came about 1998 was the first time that the term positive psychology was voiced, and that was Martin Seligman when he became the president of the American Psychological Association. And what he did when he took over the chair of that organization was to say to folk that he felt there was a real issue around the role that psychologists took in society. And I'll show you a continuum just now of what I mean by that. So for him, positive psychology, and this is his definition, is the scientific study of optimal human functioning. It aims to discover and promote the factors that allow individuals and communities to thrive. And I think that's just a lovely definition to put what we do in a nutshell. I, in particular, having worked in schools, the damage that is done by perfectionism, this someone trying to be a perfectionist. So I do love that term optimal. How do we get people to be optimal in the moment rather than feel they have to be perfect? Because of course we know that sets them up for failure. So just to talk a little bit about this idea of what Seligman was talking about when he raised this idea with his fellow psychologists at the first conference in 1998. He said that psychology as a practice has always been to treat people. So there was always this treatment paradigm. And if you look at that continuum, the idea of, we only send people to see a psychologist if they're showing signs or symptoms, or even worse, there's some mental disability has started to manifest itself. And of course, as psychologists, we try and then move people back to this neutral point. And I think where coaching has often been, I think sometimes people say, oh, you need a coach if there's something wrong and you want to fix it. Whereas actually we know, working in the field, that actually coaching should be what positive psychology is taking people from neutral and allowing them to move into this growth side of their lives. So the wellness paradigm. And so when Seligman put this out, he said, as psychologists, what we should be doing is trying to educate, raising awareness and educate people so that they can flourish. And in that way, they hopefully will be less of a burden on the system. So hence the term positive psychology, getting folk to move more up this wellness paradigm, not in the treatment paradigm. Folks, if anyone has questions, please just do jump in. And we're a smallish group, so that should be nice and easy. So if you do, maybe, actually, I'll tell you what, if you do, maybe pop them in the chat box and Pete can field them and jump in. So critically, and the more that I look at this field, the more I realize that we actually, as coaches and as positive psychology coaches in the field I work in, we should have a really clear understanding of what our definition of wellness and flourishing is. If you look at the literature that's out there, there are so many definitions of it. And sometimes it can be quite difficult for us and for our coachees if we aren't quite, I suppose, singing off the same hymn sheet. So for us to have an understanding of what we define wellness and flourishing as is quite important. And I know that there's a really powerful think tank going on as we speak with some of the top philosophers in the space, the likes of Christian Christensen, who heads up the Jubilee Center at the University of Birmingham, who's a philosopher, and some of the leading psychologists around the world, Lindsay Odes, who work in this space, trying to define, to get a kind of definition of what wellness is. What is well-being and wellness, so that there can almost be a one definition rather than all these multiple definitions. So, sorry, I'm just trying to move my thing. Sorry, folks. I'm in Africa, so I have to deal with dodgy internet at times. So apologies if I'm jumping around on this thing. So one of the things that's really interesting was this bit of research that came out from Palmer and Wybrow in 2017, which of course is quite a while ago, but already at that stage, positive psychology coaching and positive psychology interventions in our coaching space, the space that we work in, was already starting to move up the, upwards in terms of the actual approaches that people were taking. So it's really interesting. And for me, I think for us to be aware that positive psychology, even if we aren't positive psychology coaches, just to be aware of what the field can add to what it is that we do. So why do I enjoy this approach? I think for me, the field of coaching and positive psychology are very complementary. I think they've almost, if you think back to when coaching really started getting traction, it's a very similar time to the birth of positive psychology. And I think they've both grown at the same time. And it's only over the last dozen or so years, 10 or so years, that they've started to come together And there is a lot of work being done in the field now by the likes of Susie Green and Palmer and Bonniewell. There's some really powerful folk out there doing some amazing work, and I'll share their names with you in, so, I'll make sure that you have access to those folks' research if you would like it. I think secondly, and this is me and the academic approach that I tell, Pete and I have a conversation about this all the time. I really do believe that if I'm going to be delivering an intervention or an approach to coaching with my coachees, my clients, I do want to know that there's really rigorous scientific support supporting what it is that I do. I classify myself as a pracademic. I believe that, I just feel that I need to ensure that the work that I'm delivering and the work that I'm doing has very, very rigorous sound backing. The third part about this is that I've seen the agency that this approach to coaching can build within our clients. Giving a coachee a mental toolbox. And, it's not me saying you must do this, but it's giving a wide range of tools and strategies that they can get to pick and choose from to allow them to build this. My master's research when I was doing that was in sports psychology, was in this idea of self-efficacy. How do we build self-efficacy within our clients, within our athletes, whoever it is we're working with? And I think that, the term now that we use is this agency. And then what I love about this approach is that there's multiple pathways. So it gives a really clear structure, but also within that structure, there's a lot of flexibility. So it's focused yet flexible. And hopefully I'll unpack that a little bit for you in the next few. So I use, folks, I'm going to have to just jump off and let my dog in because he's scratching the door down at the moment. Give me 5 seconds. The joys of working from home. I use two frameworks. The first framework is Martin Seligman's PERMA framework. Originally, when he put this framework in place, it was just PERMA, P-E-R-M-A. You can see on the right, top right. And at a later stage, there was the V added, which is vitality. So PERMA is Martin Seligman in his research believe that there are these 5 and now 6 pathways to flourishing as human beings. The idea of positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, having meaning in one's life, achievement and accomplishment, and then the last one is vitality, which is around that whole idea of actual physical health. And what I've found is that it gives a really neat structure of areas that I can focus on with my coachees. Having a structure, a pathway that we can then dive into and talk about, for me has been something, especially over if I'm seeing someone over a period of 10 sessions, say, we can be really explicit in how we unpack that. It's not prescriptive at all, but it does give some neat structure into how we do it. The second model pathway there, or pathways that I've started using of late in education is Lee Waters' search framework, the one on the bottom 2. And I think this is born out of a couple of things. Number one, doing the course with Pete and Mick, because I think the strengths-based approach, I've always used strengths-based approach to my coaching, but actually it's come to the fore a lot more since doing the course, and looking at how we can do that. And Lee Waters' search model actually explicitly uses that. The PERMA model does under engagement, but actually it's not, what I really love about the search model is it's nice and visible there. So the second part, the E part is emotional management, and this is very much the same as the positive emotions in the Seligman model. The third part, attention and awareness, relationships. So again, some mapping very closely onto the PERMA model. But the last 2 also speak very much to me in terms of my coaching at the moment. And I think this has, of course, been driven a lot by COVID, is this idea of coping. the C at the end. So actually looking at explicitly building the, grit and resilience and optimism and all of those kinds of skills within our clients. And then the last one, which I have always done a lot of work in, and very much, I'm a big fan of BJ Fogg and the idea of tiny habits, was this idea of habits and goals. So I've started using Lee Waters' search model a lot more in my coaching, because it just speaks to the areas that I'm finding very important at the moment in my coaching. So just a few, before I jump off, the nice thing about PERMA, and because it's been around for such a long time, is that if you go onto AuthenticHappiness.org, this PERMA profiler is a free assessment that you can actually get your clients to do. You can actually get them to go on, do the assessment, and it actually, and what it does, it gives you a really nice visual of where your coachee might need to focus a little bit. And I think that's always it can be a useful tool, even if it's just there as a visual to raise awareness and as a point of conversation. To say to your client, well, I noticed that you only scored a 7 on or 6.5 on your positive emotions. So what does that tell you? Why do you think that is? Why do you feel you may score slightly lower there than you do on engagement? And if you're scoring at a 7 on engagement, and this, to be fair, I don't think I've ever seen a PERMA profile come out like this. This is way flatter than I normally it's quite spiky. So they're normally areas of real focus. So to say to them, well, what makes you score high on engagement? What is that you do there? This is an engagement speaks to things like flow, that whole idea of being able to get in, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's flow and in the zone. So really nice as a conversational piece, as a starter, to be able to unpack that. Just a few examples of what, and that bottom right there, the search model where it's strengths, and you can see, and we all know, the Clifton strengths can be under there. There's the VIA survey. I don't know if any of you know that, viacharacter.org. Values in action is again a free strength survey that you can do, but that one's more around and I've actually got it up there on the right. That's more around the 24 character strengths. That was done by Chris Peterson and Martin Seligman to try and unpack the 6 values and virtues, 4 of which are the Stoic philosophical Aristotelian philosophies, or virtues at least, and then the additional 2, which are, I'm going to forget what they are. Transcendence is one of them, because ancient philosophies never ever had transcendence. That's things like awe in their virtues. And for the life of me, I cannot think of what the 6th one is. But yeah, so a really good model to look at, and to say it sits very differently to the Clifton. As a matter of fact, I like using both because they are quite different. One's more virtues, strength.
Craig, where can you access the VIA character strengths?
Yes, so if you go onto VIA character.org, and you're able to set up a profile for free for yourself, and it is your clients can do the assessment for free. You send them a link, and you then get the results as well as them, or they can go on themselves and do it. And of course, they get the results. So it's quite nice for you to be able to send that to them and get the results yourself as well, so you can unpack it before you actually see them. The nice thing about having the professional one is it's still free. If you want to then buy the full package where you really want to unpack it in depth, you can. So, but I must admit, being able to identify the 24 character strengths is enough as a starting point, I think, especially with how skilled you all are at coaching. So that's there, obviously, just to give you a couple of examples of the types of things we do under each of those pathways. The PERMA, positive emotions, I do a lot of work on this idea of Barbara Fredrickson's buoyancy, which is getting folk to understand that because it's positive psychology doesn't mean that we're just trying to be positive, 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 because that's not what positive psychology is. Positive psychology is all as much about dealing with negative emotions. So Barbara Fredrickson talks about this idea of buoyancy, how we need to have gravity. We need to understand how to deal with negative emotions. But also there needs to be, and because negative emotions are much weightier and heavier, we need to understand that the levity part comes from the positive emotions and how do we cultivate those. So we talk a lot about cultivating positive emotions, things like gratitude, awe, love, all those really powerful positive emotions, because when we are in a positive emotional state, we go into our prefrontal cortex. When we end up thinking, we are better thinkers, we broaden our perspective, we're able then to get onto what Barbara Fredrickson calls a positive spiral of broaden and build. So this is the scientific research into this. Whereas when we're in negative emotions, when we are in our limbic brains, then our capacity to think is diminished. We're not as good at solving problems. We're not as good at creating relationships. So getting our clients to understand how powerful it is to be able to cultivate positive emotions, but also be able to deal with the negative emotions. So there's a lot of work in that space. Engagement is around understanding the benefits of flow, understanding the benefits of strengths-based approach to work. So if under that E pathway, that is specifically where I would be looking at a person's Clifton strengths and saying, okay, so, and looking at their values in action and actually unpacking, when you are in work, where if you want to flourish, you need to know what your strengths are. And we all know that piece. Relationships, understanding the physiological and the emotional benefits of having strong social support. The research is there again. Very, very powerful work done especially in times of difficulty like now, around how important relationships are. Meaning, that's kind of, always my jump off point when I'm talking to my clients about meaning is the idea of Simon Sinek's why, put it down the golden circle. What is your purpose? What is your true meaning? And to get clients and my coachees to work on identifying their meaning. Sonia Lyubomirsky does a lot of work in this as a positive psychologist, where, in her phrase is happy people have projects. And it's the idea, well, what are your projects? What is the meaning? What is your purpose? And then achievement is, again, and this is where I look at the work of BJ Fogg and his ABC, anchor behavior celebration. We need to have these micro moments of celebration. We need to have small wins, because when we have small wins, it builds self-efficacy within us. So to work within saying, so often we set these big, huge, unbelievably great goals. And we forget to put the little mini milestones in place so that our coaches and our clients can see. So what is it? And again, it's asking questions. So what are the little moments of success in between? And how do you celebrate those successes? Then vitality is around the 4 pillars: sleep, cognitive well-being, physical well-being, and nutrition. So just ensuring, saying, what are the 4 pillars? Are you as if I'm working with a headmaster of a school, saying how much sleep are you getting? And invariably, and we all know this because I imagine many of us in this Zoom room will suffer from the same thing, where we probably don't get enough sleep. And yet, we all know that we should be getting at least 7 hours sleep, and preferably 9. And yet we probably don't. So just getting that's one pillar. Then the nutrition piece and looking at what are people doing in terms of their physiological and emotional or their cognitive well-being. And that's as simple as breathing techniques, yoga, going for a run. What is it that adds to your vitality? So that's really nice and neat, the PERMA model. And then you can see, I'm not going to speak too much around the search model, that the pieces are there. And I'll share this with you, so you don't have to necessarily scribble away. But what are each of the, yeah.
Great. Just a couple of questions from Adam.
Mm.
One around some imagery around the positive and negative emotions, and any sort of diagrams that you might have of the brain and connecting that positive and negative emotions.
Absolutely, I do.
And then the other question from Adam was around, how do you suggest celebrating small successes with your clients?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because one of the things that I try and work on, and maybe this is me because of my own, if I look back at my own history, I think I've tied my own success too much to an extrinsic reward. So I work really hard on working with my coachees to build, funny, the name of my consultancy, Intrinsic, because how do we build this intrinsic reward? So for me, I often say to my coachees, giving yourself a virtual high five needs to be something that really boosts you. So, things like, and saying to yourself things like, that's like me, people know this. He's asked me, so I ran a 50-mile trail run this weekend, and 2,000 meters of elevation and whatever. And actually getting to the end, one of the things I want to say is that that's like me. This is what I do. Just that intrinsic reward. I didn't do it to get a medal. I didn't do it to come first. I didn't do it to, it was about celebrating intrinsically. So Adam, I think a lot of what I'm trying to build with coaches and clients is this, how are you internalizing this and saying to yourself, this is me. When I am successful, this is like me. When I'm successful, virtual, give yourself a mental high five, so that it becomes something that you are doing because you want to be just that. When I often talk about plus one. And is this a plus one moment? And if it is, yeah, that's like me.
That's like me at my best. Is that what you're saying? That's like me.
That's like me. I do. This is how this is me. So when I do something that is a positive, I go, but that's like me. This is what I do. I'm constantly getting better. I'm constantly improving. I'm constantly I'm being an optimist. I'm trying to be better now than I was an hour ago, better tomorrow than I was today. So trying to move away from extrinsic reward, trying to move away from people saying to me, oh, well done, Craig. Great. Yes, I saw you do that. And I think we've become, social media is the worst, because, we put ourselves up on Facebook and say, I did this. So on Facebook and say, I ran 50 miles. And then, if too often with our clients, they judge how well they did on how many likes or how many positive comments they then get off their social media. And just to try and counterbalance that with some intrinsic sort of, so that's where I'm working. And I think, there's of course there's value in extrinsic reward, but I think we need to try and shift the balance to more the intrinsic stuff. I don't know if I've answered your question.
So do you see the intrinsic being critical in overall success? So Ben was talking about communities, and it's much better to be in control of your own communities than be reliant on, say, Peter turning up, setting up this call every quarter or something. So it's in control of your own.
I'm not sure if I fully understand what you're asking, but I think critically, if you talk about relationships, if we are going to get an extrinsic reward, we'd far rather have it from those close to us. I think it's far more powerful. I personally think we should, and I know this is the utopian view of things, but we should really not worry about what other people think who are not within our immediate circle of influence. And so those really close communities, yes, that's where your extrinsic reward should come from. But actually, even more powerful than that should be how we sense ourselves when we are successful, and to try and build that muscle rather than be worried about what we're seeing on social media or what some guy thinks about us who we've never met before.
Can I,
number one, be your own fan?
Yeah, I really believe that. Number one, be your own fan. And then secondly, just those really close to you. And once you step beyond that, we shouldn't really be taking too much notice. I mean, that's very broad, obviously, because, you know, what does your circle look like? You need the client to define that for themselves. Carrie, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and let's put the hand down so I don't forget. No, one of the things that I was thinking of in relation to that, Craig, was that some of the work we do with schools, and like you, I work in education, is that we try and say to schools, don't rely on your reward system. Schools got very hung up at one point on reward systems. You know, if as a pupil or a student, you do this, you get this sticker, you get this level of reward, you get these vouchers, whatever it is. But lots of schools have really complicated rewards and sanction systems, none of which really work terribly well. They all do to a degree, but there comes a point where what you need is for the youngsters to be wanting to do well for themselves. And I think the earlier and the sooner we can build that intrinsic motivation, and I think that this intrinsic rewards is linked to that starting point of intrinsic motivation. And Pete, I know you're going to do something on motivation next week, aren't you? And I can't be there, I'm afraid. I'd love to be. I think that's a really important starting point, is building that. It's got to come from within type approach, and then that links to those intrinsic rewards rather than always relying on something to happen externally for, you know, to give you that pat on the back.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to the reward thing, and so one of the, and we know that there's a physiological response to reward, you know, and intrinsic is very powerful, but any reward. And just going back to why something, when we create these huge goals, why it's so important to have those mini milestones of success where we can tick them off and pat ourselves on the back or whatever it is because there's a physiological response. You know, oxytocin gets dumped into our body, and so which strengthens those. And if we're only having that right at the end, and this is where I'm massively critical of education in terminal exams, you know, our education system has set up, you know, everything's real, as you say, Carrie. I mean, we have these reward systems in our school. The mark system is one of them, and we don't build in the why. You know, why am I doing this subject? Why is it important? The exploration and the journey is kind of lost, and you know, you know, there's definite work trying to get it back. But as human beings, I mean, we've gone through systems where everything's been about extrinsic reward, and so I think it's a really powerful, kind of get the balance back to you know, because when there's intrinsic reward to something, the client's in control then. You know, they're in control. You know, where it's extrinsic, we're relying on how many likes we get on Facebook or whether we win the prize, or, you know, got to come first to get the gold medal. And so I think it's really, really important. And I've totally lost my track of thought as to where I was. But I mean, we're all right at the end. So I think I've managed to touch on each of those. But any questions? Because I think we're probably close to question time in any case, Pete, aren't we?
Yeah, thanks for that, Craig. And
sorry, Pete, one last thing before. So this, just goal setting, you know, grow model. We talk about when, you know, kind of our process, we talk about setting goals, and some people use SMART goals, some people, whatever. I love using this. This is Gabriele Oettingen, who's a German positive psychologist. She uses this. The full name for it is mental contrasting with implementation intentions. And it's called WHOOP. But what it is this idea of, and she says it's the way that you need, it's your goal setting technique that rubs your dreams up against reality. And I think it's a really powerful exercise. And I've got the link to this because there are some wonderful free resources that you can use with your clients, with your coachees to build this kind of thing. So, and again, also BJ Fogg uses the if-then strategy. But what it is what is your wish? So what do you want? So it's kind of now you're starting to visualize and the outcome, you know, visualizing the end point. Okay, next year I want to run a 100-mile trail run. So that's my wish. I visualize myself coming across the finish line. I know what I want to achieve, but actually I need to, that's where normal goal setting stops. But now what I want to do is I want to rub that up against reality and say, okay, well, what are the obstacles? Like, let me list all the things that could stop me from getting that. You know, I don't train enough. I don't eat correctly. You know, you can name them. And then what you do is you then create a plan to address each of the obstacles in turn. So what you start doing is you start getting your clients to visualize the outcome, pre-visualize any potential obstacles so that when they are faced with that obstacle, they have a plan to deal with it. I think it's really, really powerful. And that's the, so if my alarm goes off and I still feel tired, then I will, you know, what is my strategy? And you give the agency to the coachee and you say, what is your plan? You know, if you pick up an injury, then what is your plan? If then. And really powerful for clients if they can pre-plan their solutions before they face any of these obstacles in reality. So that's just one technique that I find massively useful for you know, in the process of yeah, I'll use an example of one of the athletes that I work with. He's a drag flicker. For those of you who play hockey, sorry, you know, sorry, Pete, I guess we have to drop in hockey somewhere.
Well, I don't think it'll work.
I don't think Carrie ever heard about hockey. When
you might enjoy a couple of golf analogies.
Yeah. So, you know, this whole idea and what we worked on was, what do you want? Okay, well, I want to be scoring drag flicks at the Olympic Games under the biggest pressure. When we play against Germany and the score is 2-2 and I get a penalty flick, I want to be able to score it. So then he visualizes the outcome. And then what are the obstacles? And pretty much the obstacle for him was total lack of belief in his own ability. Like, the guy's unbelievable. I mean, he's, you know, drag flicks international thing, but still didn't think he was good enough. So then to visual, and actually his was all about how he sensed himself, what he felt. He buttoned up. And all of a sudden, so he couldn't really just let himself go. So he was just that little bit, and Pete's a drag flicker, so he'll know what this is like. If you have any tension in your body when you're flicking, you're just never going anywhere. So we worked on creating a physiological response. If then created an anchor, those of you who have done NLP, created a really powerful anchor that when he was in that situation, he anchored himself, he built a plan to create a physiological anchor that just released the tension, and he went in. And the score was 2-2 when he scored to put it up 3-2. And they the first time they've ever beaten Germany in the history of any big tournament. So yeah, so there we go. That's it, Pete. I think any question, I'm going to go back to this slide because sometimes that is quite nice to prompt any questions, because you can kind of see the two frameworks in there.
Yeah, firstly, so many golden nuggets. I love that rubbing your dreams up against reality piece. And Ben, you had a question about, so I'm just going to bring you in first as well. And just whilst you're preparing for your question, Ben, that slide at the bottom, Craig, that's just got months of coaching tucked into it, hasn't it? Years of coaching.
You know, Pete, I think that's the thing. As I know, what we don't want to do is be prescriptive. I mean, that's the whole point of coaching versus going to a psychologist. And for me, though, I have a lot more confidence in my ability to help my coachees, help my clients. If I have this kind of in my own, I have a plan, I suppose, a framework. But actually within the framework, there's a lot of flexibility in there. So for us to not have to be prescriptive in what we do, and you know, just building strategies for our clients that they can then pick and choose, they can build. So we almost saying, well, here's the menu, but you go as a client, you choose what we want to work on, you build your agency within that. So I think that's what's really powerful about it. It's kind of almost it's not a really free coaching where it's just about asking questions. There is a kind of, there are boxes to it, but within those boxes, there's a lot of flexibility. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a couple. I got Fraser with his hand up. Ben was going to ask a question around exploring the unique differences between how people find resilience, and Fiona. I'll just ask Fiona's question first because it was the quick one. Yeah. Is there a link for the Whoop exercise?
Yes, I will. Let me. So, you know what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give you the. I will send it. I'll actually send it, Pete, if you're able to pass it on to folk. I think that's probably better, because otherwise I'll search for it now. But what it does is there's a whole lot of files there that give a really nice, give the exercises, gives a short definition of the rundown of Whoop, the background to it, how you use it, and then it gives various solutions around how you can implement the plan part of it, which I think is really powerful. So,
Ben, we'll go to you first, and then we'll throw over to Fraser.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Thank you for that. I really enjoyed that, Craig. Quick question. So you spoke about building resilience as something that's really key in the clients that we're working with, and I love that. But how do you? I find building resilience so unique. I have to really hold on to my advice monster, because my go-to is like, just go and run a marathon, like go and do something extreme, and that will build resilience, right? And it sounds like you do some of that type of stuff as well. So how do you, I guess, keep your advice monster in? What type of language do you use to explore sort of mental resilience and building that, mate?
Wow. So, I mean, that's a really good question, because it's a really difficult piece. And I think at the moment as well. So what I like, so a lot of the work that I'm doing in this space is with teachers who are working with young people. So I'm going to use that as, if you don't mind, and you can draw the parallels for the field that you work in. So I do a lot of looking back. So give me an example of where you were faced with some adversity, and unpack that for me. Where you've been, because you're here now. So clearly you've been able to move through that space. Can you look back? And I think what it is again, it's about creating an awareness within people that, we only truly know if we're brave when we look back. So it's always after an event. We only know, hope only comes, people say, well, hope comes when we're hoping about something in there. Well, no, hope actually comes from experiencing stuff and believing we can go push through. So when it comes to resilience and grit and all of these kinds of things, I like looking back and saying to people, look at where the things you've done in your past, where you've done well. And no matter who a person is, they will always find, even if it's small little things, and to then say, okay, so actually you have the ability to be resilient. You have the ability to, I think trying to, so you get them to unpack it themselves first. What's the definition of grit? It's passion plus persistence, isn't it? So, it's about keep moving, keep going. That's all resilience is. That's all grit is about that ability to just keep moving. And, it's just, I know it sounds too simplistic, doesn't it? But actually, that's what it is. So what you try and do is get them to look back, see moments where they have just pushed through, kept going, and say, well, that's it. It's as simple as that. There's no magic formula. People think it's way more complicated than it is. I mean, resilience is scary because people don't think they have it, but actually we all do, because all it is about just keeping moving forward.
Fraser, your hand's been up for a while. Your small robotic hand, over to you, mate.
It's aching. Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Craig. Great presentation. Super interesting topic. I'm just going back to the PERMA model and looking at each individual element.
Yeah.
You're clearly steeped in the understanding and knowledge through your backgrounds. But for someone like me who doesn't have that background, if I was going to broach a topic such as positive emotions, what would you say the base knowledge needs to be to have that conversation?
Yeah, that really good question. So for me, the base knowledge would be that because as human beings, we have a negativity bias is massively powerful. So as human beings, we gravitate towards negative emotion. You know, genetically, we predisposed to that. That's how we survived. You know, that's what I always say when I'm presenting to a group of teachers, you know, doing a positive psychology session, I'll say to them, you are all so good at being negative. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Genetically, the reason you are alive is because you didn't go out and pat that dinosaur on the nose. You know, you ran. So what's happened is you've survived because your forefathers have been very, very good at identifying, having a negativity bias. So the critical thing in this is that we understand as human beings that we have a predisposition towards negative emotions, and that the research that is there is that we need to be engaged in at least 3 times as many positive emotional events versus negative emotions. So the 3-to-1 ratio is critical. And so we need to cultivate positive emotions. We need to seek out opportunities to ensure that we are engaged in positive emotional events 3 times more than negative emotional events. That would be, like, for me, the cornerstone of this building the positive emotion pathway. Things like gratitude journaling I think is a massively powerful exercise. Again, Martin Seligman's research, just before you go to bed, 3 things that went well today. What are 3 things I'm grateful for? You know, sitting down at the dining room table with your children and saying, what are you grateful for today? What it does, and we know physiologically when we are thinking about positive emotions, we go into our thinking brain, to our prefrontal cortex. When we are in that negativity bias, negative emotions, we start sliding back into our reptilian brain. So just those 2 things, understanding thinking brain, positive emotions, you know, reptilian brain, negative emotions. Where are we going to find solutions? Where are we going to be, you know, be able to create social bonds? It's out here in our prefrontal cortex with positive, you know, with positive emotions. So build them. Or it's another really beautiful, go for a walk, look at the beauty around you. That's a powerful emotion. Love, I mean, the most powerful positive emotion is love. And it's not necessarily the love you feel for. Sorry, Siri wanted to speak to me. Children, or, you know, your partner, it can be love in a much greater sense than that. So cultivating those positive emotions. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. I just had one other question, slightly different, but do you use a particular framework around visualization with your clients?
So I also kind of did a lot of NLP training when I was sort of in the early days. So I do use, you know, my visualization is very much around ensuring that using all the senses, you know, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, trying to really get a person to immerse themselves in the experience when they're visualizing. So it's not just a visual, it's not just something that's visual, it's actually something that they're living, but not a specific framework as such, but rather just taking the NLP kind of idea of what visualization is and just building from there.
Okay, thank you very much.
So we're just coming up to the hour in a moment. So there's a little bit of a crescendo happening for this session. And David, I'll just get you to start warming up your prefrontal cortex for your piece in a second. I just want to share one of my favorite nuggets. That Whoop piece I just absolutely loved. And the other piece that I really loved was That's Like Me. That's Like Me. That idea of internalizing good things that happen as much as possible. Love that. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just add to that? I mean, really, those of you who are, to me, I think a lot of the work we do is to try and get our coachees, our clients to build positive habits, to build habits of flourishing, for them to be successful. And it can be in different areas of those pathways, but everything we do, really, if we can create positive habits within our clients, then they tend to have a better chance of flourishing. So if you're into that, BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits as a book, I think is massively powerful. It's a great resource to look at, because there's some great strategies in there to build that. And that's like me is actually one of a strategy out of his work.
Yeah, I love that. The table at the bottom, the words on it are really small. I'd love a high def image of that I can share with everybody later on. And Craig, thank you so much for that. That was so great. And there were so many little nuggets that we can take into our sessions. The other one was a pracademic, which I'll be stealing off you as well. John Viney, who loves a good bit of language and prose, has already written it down. Did you know about that? Have you used that word before, pracademic?
I haven't, but it is written down. I'm scared of how well you know me. It's very disconcerting. I feel judged, and rightly so.
Just from my side, thanks so much. I just love sharing this stuff, and I'm really passionate about it. So I hope it's been a useful little bit of time for all of you, and I hope you find something. And please reach out to me if you want to have a more in-depth conversation about any of the aspects. I'd love to connect with you.
Yeah, thank you, mate. Love it. Thank you so much. Has anybody got any last-minute questions or contributions? Because there's a lot of pretty high-performing business people in this room. Has anybody got any contributions or golden nuggets that they would add to that, to those ideas that have been shared? JV, and any thoughts around BD from you that you would share?
Yeah, I think everything which has been highlighted is lovely. I really like the energy. I think that's got to be the most important, and I really like the action points as well. But there's so much good. I'd only be repeating what's already been said.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Alrighty, everybody, thank you so much for joining. Craig, thank you, mate, for delivering that. I really, really appreciate it. And we can sit and talk. That's basically what Craig and I do in our spare time. We just sit and talk positive psychology with each other. So you guys got to hear it. Thank you, mate. I really appreciate that. And David as well for doing that. And to everybody else for carrying on this journey. If you are not quite sure where you all are with your supervision and all those sorts of things, but you've got those supervision sessions if you want them. So reach out to Olivia and schedule that session to get that accreditation. And yeah, thank you so much for joining tonight. And we'll see you on the next one, Q4 session, sometime in December. Thank you so much, everybody. Lovely to see you.
Well, pass, mate. Cheers, TTT.
Cheers, Ben.